At 6:42 local time, the sea north of Puerto La Cruz sent a clear message about who truly rules those waters. The Venezuelan patrol vessel Gishi, a 2,300-ton gray shape built for coastal defense, was moving through its routine dawn patrol at 14 knots. Radar was humming, sonar was quietly working beneath a calm Caribbean morning, and the bridge carried that familiar mix of diesel and stale coffee sailors know too well. It was the kind of rhythm that makes the ocean feel manageable. It did not last. Sonar picked up a distortion. At first it was small, almost easy to dismiss. Then it turned violent. The blue glow of the screen flashed into warning red. The operator froze. Displacement spike, bearing 086, rapid ascent. In plain language, something large was rising fast. 2 miles off the bow, the surface of the sea swelled as if it had swallowed a mountain. A second later, steel broke through the water and sent a 30-foot column of spray into the air. No distress signal, no radio call, just a dark hull emerging cold, clean, and deliberate. Gishi's sensors erupted with warnings, depth profiles flashed. Alarms lit the room, and inside the Combat Information Center, every sailor recognized the outline instantly. A tall sail, tapered lines, a matte black surface that seemed to drink in the morning light. No markings, no flag, but no one needed a label. Recognition came immediately. A Virginia-class U.S. Navy submarine had surfaced, and 5 seconds earlier, it had been completely invisible. Captain Rojas did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Track and log. That alone was enough. General quarters followed almost on instinct. Doors sealed. Crew moved to stations. The ship's twin diesels climbed from a steady rhythm into a strained growl. Gishi turned to starboard, holding an intercept angle while keeping a cautious 1.9 nautical mile buffer. At that range, even a seabird could have triggered radar attention. But this was no wildlife. This was pure hardware. From the surface, the American submarine looked almost unreal. Water streamed down its sail in thin silver lines. The hull caught the early sunlight with a cold metallic sheen. Nothing about its motion looked accidental. No drift. No awkward list. Every wake line, every bubble trail looked calculated. Whoever commanded that boat had not surfaced there by chance. Inside the Venezuelan CIC, the data poured in, bearing 086 steady. Closest point of approach narrowing slowly. Radar range 1.9 nautical miles. Sonar return far beyond normal range. One technician adjusted the gain just to keep the display readable. For 3 full minutes, even the ocean seemed to go quiet. No radio message came from the submarine. None was expected. Emissions control meant the Americans were following their own script. Show up, hold position, disappear. It is the kind of move that reminds everyone that maritime rules are one thing, and capability is something else entirely. Gishi was not some forgotten relic limping through old patrol patterns. It carried Italian-built sensors and doctrine shaped by Soviet influence, a hybrid of 2 military worlds that never fully agreed on what defense should look like. The ship patrolled what Venezuela called the Bolivarian Security Zone. Officially, its mission was to safeguard maritime sovereignty. In reality, it was a modest patrol ship operating at the edge of a much larger power's playground. At 6:44, the captain ordered optical confirmation. Through binoculars, the black shape dominated the horizon. The rising sun flashed off details that should not have been visible at that distance. No periscopes up, no crew on deck, just the sail and part of the hull above the surface, still releasing trapped pockets of air. The submarine looked as if it owned the silence around it. Back on the Venezuelan bridge, the crew worked with disciplined calm. Cameras locked on target. Timestamps were recorded. Every line of data was stored and duplicated to an external drive. They knew the rule in gray zone waters. You do not escalate, you document. Information is the first instrument of power. At 6:45, the engine room reported full propulsion readiness. Gishi stayed steady at 14 knots, with the coastline 19 nautical miles astern, close enough to retreat toward if necessary, far enough away to preserve the appearance of neutrality. The captain's voice remained level, but his eyes never left the dark sail on the horizon. No one said it aloud, yet everyone understood the truth. That submarine had almost certainly mapped Gishi's acoustic signature long before anyone on the bridge saw it. It was not announcing itself. It was making a point. By 6:47, the radar picture had settled. The submarine remained nearly motionless, aligned on bearing 086, as if daring the patrol ship to make the next move. On Jishi's sonar screen, the chaotic trace had flattened back into calm blue. The ocean had already returned to pretending that nothing unusual had happened. The captain let out a slow breath. "Keep recording. No transmissions." The words sounded almost ceremonial. Outside, the water shimmered under a peaceful sky. But everyone on that bridge understood what the moment meant. When an American submarine chooses to be seen, it is not because it has been discovered, it is because it wants to be noticed. Jishi continued its slow arc to the north, its wake cutting neatly through the still water. Somewhere below, the submarine's reactor was quietly at work, a nearly silent reminder of power that had no need to explain itself. The Caribbean looked calm again, but in naval language, calm is simply a pause between changes. At 6:47 local time, the world had narrowed to 2 vessels and a few miles of charged seawater. Jishi held course at 14 knots. The American submarine, half submerged and silent, sat still like a black monolith ringed by foam. The rising sun had climbed high enough to reflect off its sail, turning that dark shape into something like a blade. No visible motion, no signal lights, no radio call, just a nuclear-powered question mark parked off Venezuela's northern line. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air felt heavy. Screens glowed, relays clicked. Every man in the room was waiting for the first real change in the pattern. A turn, a ping, anything. The sonar operator finally cut through the quiet. Contact steady, depth 0, no propeller noise. In simple terms, the submarine was not repositioning. It was holding exactly where it wanted to be. Captain Rojas answered calmly. Maintain 15 knots. Record bearing drift. This was less about movement than posture, a way of showing presence without stepping over the line. The ship's gyro compass showed a slight change from 086 to 084 degrees. The submarine was turning, but only by a degree or two, just enough to line its sail more directly toward the Venezuelan bow. In the language of naval encounters, that was body language. Deliberate, measured, impossible to misread. The captain did not need anyone to interpret it. When a warship angles itself toward you, it is not admiring the view. It is sending a message. By 6:49, the closest point of approach had dropped to 1.6 nautical miles. Radar confirmed there were no nearby U.S. surface ships, and somehow that made the scene more unsettling. One submarine, alone and visible by choice, had the effect of a marksman stepping into the open because he already knows the balance of power. The Americans called this a presence operation. The Venezuelans had their own phrase for it, testing the leash. On deck, a few sailors had gathered by the starboard rail, binoculars fixed on the horizon. Regulations frowned on staring, but even experienced crews were not used to seeing a U.S. submarine this close and this exposed in the morning haze. Its shape looked almost unreal, smooth and seamless, with no visible weld lines, its hull swallowing the sunlight as though it resented attention. Then it happened. In the sonar room, the gain controls flickered. A single ping rolled through the hull, sharp, clean, and loud enough to make the bulkheads tremble. Active sonar. Not an act of open hostility, but a form of punctuation, as if someone had cleared their throat before speaking. The room froze. The technician looked up. "Sir, they pinged us." Rojas did not flinch. "Copy. Maintain course. Keep recording." It was not a strike. It was a statement. "We see you clearly now. No more guesswork." The Americans were collecting measurements, hull density, echo pattern, return decay, data that in maritime intelligence could be worth more than gold. At 6:50, the Venezuelan captain ordered a lateral adjustment. "Bring us to parallel bearing. Maintain 2 nautical mile offset." The helm answered immediately, and Jishi shifted to a course just off the submarine's beam. A textbook move, not reckless, but firm enough to show resolve. From the bridge, the submarine now occupied the center of the horizon. It still had not moved in any obvious way. The water around it looked strangely calm, as if even the sea understood something serious was underway. Every radar sweep, every electronic trace, every signal characteristic was being recorded by both sides. The Americans were logging Venezuelan search frequencies, radar outputs, and communication habits. The Venezuelans were cataloging hull angle, surface reflections, and wake behavior. In modern naval competition, the exchange does not begin with launchers. It begins with metadata. By 6:52, the distance had narrowed again, this time to 1.3 nautical miles. On Jishi's deck, the .50 caliber crews moved into position, barrels raised but unfired. Their purpose was not to act. Their purpose was to be visible, ready if the moment ever demanded it. Visibility had become its own form of diplomacy. Inside the CIC, communications had faded to whispers. The submarine's sonar pulse came once more, weaker than before, then dissolved into the background noise of the sea. After that, silence returned. The radar trace remained solid, no dive, no propulsion signature. It was waiting. At last, the captain spoke, half to the log and half to himself. "They're measuring us, seeing how close we'll stay." His executive officer gave a small nod and said nothing. There was little left to add. The two vessels were locked in a game of maritime chess, separated by little more than 1.5 miles of open water and an enormous gap in strategic power. One careless bearing change, one overeager sensor lock, and the consequences could spiral into something neither side could afford. At 6:55, the Venezuelan deck cameras zoomed tight on the submarine's hull. Surface markings shimmered faintly. Pressure vents released the last of their trapped air. Nothing looked rushed. Every detail suggested procedure, discipline, intention. By 6:57, nothing had changed, and that in itself had become the escalation. In these moments, silence can be louder than noise, especially when nuclear propulsion is somewhere in the background. The bridge log recorded the final note of that phase. Closest point of approach, 1.2 nautical miles. U.S. submarine stationary. Visual confirmation steady. No hostile action observed. Tension high. In other words, no retreat, no open escalation, and no sign that either side intended to blink. At 6:57, the standoff had matured into something only professionals can sustain. Two crews, two nations, both aware that every knot, every bearing, every breath was likely being monitored somewhere far beyond the horizon, perhaps in a command center where this encounter was already becoming a report. Jishi held steady at 15 knots on course 084. The submarine had not shifted in 15 minutes. It remained half submerged, its sail facing the Venezuelan vessel like a drawn blade held in perfect stillness. Then, at 6:58, the calm changed. A subtle roll to port. Barely 10 degrees, but enough to alter the tone in the room immediately. The sonar operator called it out at once. "Contact bearing changing, 086 to 083. They're lining up on us." It was not a weapons lock. It was geometry. The kind of movement that comes just before either a controlled acknowledgement or a sharper warning. Captain Rojas answered without hesitation. "Parallel course, port 5 degrees. Maintain 2-mile offset." The helmsman followed the order precisely. It wasn't an act of defiance. It was about presence, the maritime equivalent of holding someone's gaze without looking away. On board Jishi, the crew could feel the subtle shift as the ship cut across the submarine's beam, sliding sideways through the light Caribbean chop. For the next 90 seconds, neither side said a word. Radio stayed silent. No signals, no calls, just the steady vibration of Jishi's engines filling the bridge. Then, almost imperceptibly, the submarine moved again. A slight correction back to bearing 084. And then, stillness. The Venezuelan crew had seen this pattern before during NATO drills. Controlled posture locks. Tiny, deliberate adjustments meant to provoke a reaction. A test of discipline. The captain didn't respond. He held steady. At 6:59, a faint plume vented from the submarine's sail. To an untrained observer, it looked insignificant. But to anyone familiar with submarines, it was a clear signal, preparation for descent. The sonar technician spoke quietly, eyes fixed on the display. "She's going down." Seconds later, the change became obvious. Air bubbles spread outward as the massive hull began slipping beneath the surface. No signal, no closing gesture, just the physics of steel returning to the depths. The sea folded over itself, first foam, then smooth, as if nothing had disturbed it at all. By the time Jishi's radar completed its next sweep, the submarine was gone. 700 hours. On sonar, the screen returned to a calm, empty blue. The contact faded after just a few sweeps, gone in seconds. The ocean had erased the moment without a trace, the way it always does. On the bridge, silence lingered. Every sailor stared at the same empty stretch of water, unsure whether to feel relief or something closer to frustration. The captain spoke first. "Mark final coordinates. Save all logs." His tone remained calm, controlled. But beneath it, the weight of the moment was unmistakable. Inside the Combat Information Center, technicians immediately began exporting data. Sonar returns, radar tracks, every recorded detail onto encrypted drives. Every frequency, every bearing, every second would be analyzed later in Caracas. Not for escalation, but for understanding. Because in situations like this, not knowing is far more dangerous than any direct confrontation. Far below the surface, nearly 200 feet down, the American submarine continued its quiet withdrawal. Its hydrophones confirmed what it needed to know. The Venezuelan vessel had not pursued. A routine entry would follow. Presence operation complete. No incident. Local response time recorded. Data transmitted securely. For the American crew, the moment was already finished. Logged, processed, archived before the surface above had even settled. For the Venezuelans, it meant something more. This wasn't just another contact. It was a reminder that their patrol routes were being observed in real time, that their defensive zone was more of an idea than a barrier. The submarine hadn't appeared to threaten, it had appeared to demonstrate. Later that morning, during the debrief, the officers would summarize it in careful, neutral language. An unidentified U.S. Navy submarine surfaced approximately 1.8 nautical miles from the patrol line. No aggressive actions observed, likely surveillance activity. The report would be clean, precise, stripped of the quiet intensity that had filled the bridge when that dark hull first broke through the sea. By 7:03, the tension began to ease. Coffee cups returned to hands, engine noise softened as speed adjusted. The patrol continued as if nothing unusual had occurred. But no one on board truly believed that. Encounters like this don't simply end. They stay with you. For the U.S. Navy, it was doctrine in motion, a calculated display of presence shaped by timing and precision. For Venezuela, it was proof that detection systems only reveal what others choose to show. Between them was an invisible boundary, not a physical border, but a test of resolve. At 7:05, the final entry was written into Gishi's log. Incident concluded. Submarine submerged. Last known position recorded. Sea conditions calm, crew steady, and just like that, it was over. The ocean moved on without comment. No headlines, no signals, no formal exchanges. Just another quiet encounter between two navies fluent in a language where the strongest message is often the one never spoken aloud.